Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sara Kehaulani Goo of Axios and Will Gardiner of Elimini.
Good morning. It's nice to be here with you. Nice to be here with you, Will.
Thanks, Sarah.
Let's just jump right in. Will Gardiner is the CEO of Drax, as you just heard. And your company announced some very big news yesterday. News when it comes to addressing climate change and news in the United States in terms of investment. So let's start there with the news. You just announced a new company yesterday called Elimini that is going to be making a very significant investment, $4 billion in the short term, as much as $12 billion in the longer term in carbon capture, focusing on the southeast part of the United States. And also, you're a big foray into BECCS, right?
Yep.
Bioenergy carbon capture, and it's not without its critics, for sure. But I'd love for you to tell us a little bit why you're making this bet and why now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Maybe I'll start a little bit about Drax and then get into why we've decided to set up Elimini. So Drax is a renewable power company based in the UK. We started our life as a coal-fired power station, the largest one in Western Europe back in the day. And over the last 20 years, we've converted the whole power station to using biomass, so to become a renewable power company. So we're now the largest renewable power company in the UK. Right? And as I thought about what the next step for the company would be, effectively we said if we add carbon capture to this, you end up with what we can call a carbon removal technology. Right? And for me, carbon removals is really one of the next big steps in the whole climate change sort of challenge. I mean, it's going to be one of the key technologies for actually delivering sort of a solution to climate change. And why is that important? Because we have to reduce emissions. I think we all get that. But I think increasingly realize that we're not moving fast enough. We're supposed to be having our emissions during the 2020s, and we're almost halfway through the decade, and we're not really getting there. So actually removing CO2 permanently from the atmosphere is something we have to do. So we've set up Elimini to effectively do carbon removals. It's sort of carbon removals for good, right? And the idea is that we'll build biomass power stations starting here in the US, as Sarah mentioned, with carbon capture and storage. So effectively what we'll do is we'll capture the CO2 coming out of the power station and we'll bury it permanently underground, ending up with permanent carbon removals, right? And I think everyone would say, the IPCC, for example, would say that in order to get to net zero, we'll need potentially as much as 10 gigatons a year of carbon removals in 2050. And that market has prices in today of $300 to $400 to even $800 a ton. So you can see this is a very big, I think, market and business opportunity. So very pleased to have set that up, and we're looking forward to actually getting going.
And your business, and maybe to the why now, your business will take advantage of IRA subsidies available in the United States. But tell us a little bit more about your business model, particularly with this new carbon capture venture. How much will you need to depend on government subsidies, and how much do you expect to rely on other revenue sources from the private sector?
No, thank you, Sarah. Can you guys all hear me? I said, yeah. Maybe not before, sorry. So effectively, the model is you build a power station, which actually will generate power that we'll use some of that power to drive the carbon capture plant, but a lot of that power we can still sell, right? So you end up with a power station selling power, and you end up with carbon removal. So you'll capture the CO2 and then store it underground, and you'll generate so-called CDRs, or carbon dioxide removal certificates, that actually there's a quite small still, but we expect growing and attractive market that we can sell those, right? So what's driving this? First one is the demand for 24/7 green power is big and massively growing, right? As artificial intelligence takes off, we all know we need more data centers. The expectations for the demands for power are huge. And what we need is, we need renewable power from wind and sun, but that is intermittent. So it's not always there, and biomass power is always there. So we'll sell the power, and that's a big piece of the story, right? Mm-hmm. Then we'll sell the CDR. So for example, what's happened so far is there have been a couple of deals announced, a couple in Europe, where effectively, a buyer, someone like a Microsoft, does long-term purchases now. They're buying forward. the carbon dioxide removal certificates for, let's say, 250,000 tons of removal per year over the next 10 years. So that's the second revenue stream. And then, the 45Q tops it off, right? So I guess the final point to make is that the UK is another place where we'll do this. Very attractive market. I think the UK has been a leader in climate change for a long time. But I think with the 45Q and the IRA in general, the US has really made it attractive to invest in next generation energy transition technologies here in the UK, here in the US. So we look forward to doing that.
So to summarize, it sounds like the revenue streams will be, yes, IRA government subsidies, selling the carbon removal credits, and also selling electricity from these power plants eventually. So tell us a little bit about this, because for the amount of investment, these are big numbers you're talking about. What's the longer term realistic goal for how you can wean yourself off of government subsidies, or do you feel like that's always going to have to be a part of the equation?
No, so it's absolutely something we aim to do to get off those, right? So the first one would be, from a cost perspective, this is a first of a kind project, right? And so over time, we would expect improvements in the solvent technology, so greater carbon capture rates. It takes a lot of energy to actually do the carbon capture and then actually to reverse the process to get to a pure stream of CO2. So we're doing lots of work on how we can reduce the energy required in that. So that's another route towards a cost reduction. Integrating the sort of the heat transfer elements of this, the power station with the CCS, again, other routes there. So we expect there'll be lots of learning effects. The whole market for carbon transport and storage is new. So again, we would expect the cost of that to come down. So there's lots of routes towards cost reduction.
Right.
If you think about the market for CDRs, it'll be interesting to see what happens, because the technology costs will come down. So effectively, our costs will come down, but also the need for them and the demand for them will grow. And as we get closer to net zero, the alternative ways of actually reducing net emissions will become more expensive, right? So we're doing a lot of decarbonization now that actually is arguably some of the low-hanging fruit. I mean, converting the energy sector, for example, from fossil fuels now to solar and wind, that's cheaper, right?
Right.
As we get further out, it'll get more expensive. And so I think the opportunity for CDRs to actually increase in value over time is quite interesting.
So, Will, I want to give you a chance to respond to environmentalists who've really criticized the existing business that you're in biomass, which, yes, it is not dependent on carbon, but it is it has many steps in the production or operational process of, taking dead wood or wood that's not available or byproduct, creating these wood pellets with heavy industrial machinery and then shipping them from the United States to the UK. So all of those sound like they do have a footprint, of course. And so how does the math work? What do you say to critics who think that are very skeptical that this really nets out to be positive for the environment and just the biomass business you're in?
No, that's great. Well, thank you, Sarah, because that's a good question and something that we spend a lot of time working on. And I guess the first thing I would say is that in order for sort of biomass power generation and or BECCS bioenergy with carbon capture and storage to actually work and deliver what it says it does, as in carbon removals, it has to be done sustainably. And there are very clear rules, for example, for biomass power generation in the UK for what that means. So, for example, we need to be taking wood from forests that are regrowing. We need to respect and not harm biodiversity. We have strict limits on what the CO2 emissions can be through the supply chain. And if you think about, for example, if you're generating 1 megawatt hour of power from coal, it's roughly speaking, 1 ton of CO2. It's less than 100 kilograms of CO2 that's actually generated through our whole supply chain, and that's coming down. I mean, we reduce that, quite actively year on year. So absolutely, it has to be done in the right way, and we think we're doing that.
And how do you account for that, for tracking that, reporting that, delivering that information? And throughout the process, you have a lot of stakeholders. You have investors, you have taxpayers, in the UK is now the US in the future, who want to know how exactly the breakdown of what you just described.
So, I mean, if I think about my biomass business today, we actually, you can look at our annual report, and there's a very clear description of what it's done. That's all audited, reviewed, verified, et cetera. So that's part of what we do now, and it's part of the regulatory requirements we have in the UK. I would say more importantly, in some ways, and more interestingly, as we move forward and we end up with a BECCS CDR or carbon credit, we have a methodology that we've published, and it's actually now being peer reviewed. It's open, so for those interested, please look at it. It's on our website. But the idea is that the carbon credits or carbon dioxide removal credits that we will generate will be net of all of the emissions in the supply chain. So effectively, any emissions that come from sort of making the power, sort of transporting things around, all of that will be netted. So the actual removal credit you'll get will be effectively, a true representation of the net impact of what we're doing.
And what's the frequency that we'll be reporting on all these figures?
So,
Is it annual, or would it be quarterly, or what would the frequency be?
So at least annually, but we need, frankly, to be honest, and we were still working out exactly how that will work. But the interesting thing, again, for me on this is that there's the corporate stakeholders who will become customers for us are extremely stringent and extremely careful of what they're doing. I mean, this is something, for them, this is a voluntary purchase that they're making, and they want to make sure that it works and make sure it does what it says on the tin. So we are and will be working with them to make sure it works for them, so that when, again, a big tech company says, I've actually done these removals, that they actually can say that and validate that it's real.
Now, we're here at UNGA, and of course your business is subject to some bit of politics, geopolitics, and commitments, right, that are behind the subsidies that your company receives. So I want to ask you about that, how you think about that and plan for that, because I know that some of the subsidies you get run out in the UK in 2027. And here in the United States, of course, we're just months away from an election, a consequential election, under which if former President Trump is elected, he's promised to roll back the IRA. So how do you think about that, plan for that? What are your expectations there?
So I would say, in a very big picture way, what we're trying to build in the company, at Elimini, at Drax more broadly, is a company where our success is aligned with sort of success, in the climate change battle. Right? And so sort of one of my fundamental beliefs is that we as a population, as a world community, want to win that battle. And so everything we do is aligned. Now there's a big step between wanting to do that and achieving it, which does depend on government policy to make that happen. Right? So we work closely with governments to make sure that happens. And this is why, again, I think that the whole question of the voluntary carbon markets are so important, because the more that actually the corporate world believes this is a business opportunity and something that they want to do, and it's less dependent upon government action, I think the better that will be for us, right? If I think about the sort of coming elections, and we've just been through one in the UK, and we're working very closely with the new government, who's got a commitment to a net zero power system by 2030, which we hope to make a very big contribution to. That's important for us. And I think for me, regardless of who wins the next election, I think most of the elements of the IRA are pretty much locked in. The benefits of that sort of are widely spread across the U.S., north, south. Both parties effectively benefit from those, and more importantly, people on both sides of the aisle benefit from that. And I think the business community in the U.S. is increasingly committed to these things, and I think that will drive much of the future.
Yes, well, yeah, I've heard, so the talk in Washington is that exactly that there's enough investment in red states as well as blue states, so that's your understanding as well from what I hear you saying. But I guess on the business side, there's also been, we at Axios, we spoke with John Kerry and Al Gore earlier this week, who really raised the alarm around the corporate commitment to climate. And I wonder if on the business side, if you have some concerns there about backsliding.
So I guess two different perspectives on that. So when I sort of meet with business leaders and they say, I would like to have renewable power, that's real, right? I mean, they want renewable power. I think a lot of the data center companies, for example, would love to have 24/7 green renewable power, and biomass power provides that. And I think that's real, right? And if you actually look in the marketplace, the premium that they're willing to pay for that is quite significant, and I think that's real. Right? I mean, there's lots of stuff around the edges, like is it really 24/7? Is it hourly matched, et cetera? So there's plenty of topics for improving that. I think if you look at the market for carbon dioxide removals, the main distinction I would make is that forest-based credits have come under there's been a lot of controversy about how credible those are. Right. And I think those controversies are real, and that market needs to mature and needs to grow up, and it needs to become more verified, and I think there's a real issue there. The key thing that's different about a BECS credit is it's a permanent sort of technological, permanent geological solution. We can actually measure how much CO2 actually goes out of a pipeline and gets injected and stored underground. Right? So it's real. And we're seeing sort of real commitment to that. I mean, the market is small. So the real question for me on that one is, how quickly does it grow? Because there's a few big players, and we need more corporate commitment to make that real.
Great. I think we're about to get the hook here, but thank you so much, Will. This has been a fascinating conversation, a lot to talk about, a lot of layers in your business and new investment. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you all, and thank you, Sarah. And I have to say, we're going to be removing carbon for good, so I look forward to working with everybody who's interested in that topic.
Great. Thank you.